Every time a new chapter or paragraph gets released into Dead by Daylight, there's always an update to the achievements page, increasing the amount needed to do for 100% completion. One set of achievements that are essentially guaranteed to appear are the Survivor and Killer Adepts, achievements that require you to escape or get a 4K with the required Survivor or Killer using only their 3 teachable perks that they come packaged with. For this video, we'll be ranking the ease of obtaining the killer-related ones, judging based off how good the killer themselves are, their add-on strength and or how much of a difference their best add-ons will make in the match, and what perks they have to work with out of 5 points each. This essentially means that the highest total point value each killer can get is 15, making them the adepts most likely to get done sooner rather than later, while the lowest and harder ones are ranked as 0 at worst. One thing I should point out is that this does not factor in maps, survivor skill, and survivor perk loadouts, as this is all something included within the matchmaking's variants. You can get the hardest adept in the game done in one match, or the easiest in several games if the stars are aligned for either role, or if you're just that unlucky. And thanks to variants being a massive headache-inducing factor in the ranking and just this game in general, I've decided to keep it simple and leave it out and instead rank by likelihood that you'll get the adept done in a single match. That way I don't have to give myself a migraine trying to rank around RNG. Another thing I should point out is that I do not have the killers ranked in order outside of their number ranges. I'll be providing a list at the end of the ranking of everyone categorized properly, so if you don't want to hear me yap and explain each killer individually, you can just look at that and call it a day. Without further ado, let's start ranking. Starting with the killer adepts that will likely take you multiple games to get, we have total point values 0 to 3. Only 2 killers reside here, the first being Skull Merchant. I don't have to explain this one, do I? The main issue with Merchant Adept is obviously Merchant herself, but her add-ons, while there's a few useful ones in here, don't help her out enough to make her time getting this adept done less painful. Her perks are decent enough on other killers except maybe Game Afoot or if you've made combos out of them, but they don't really help with Skull Merchant's gameplay of setting up drones and timing rotations to get information and claw traps. Thankfully, the devs did confirm in a recent stream that she will be getting buffs later, so maybe this can change later down the road. What isn't going to change anytime soon, however, is Ghostface's Adept. Ghostface is one of the worst killers in the game currently, especially with all the pallets littering half the maps at the moment, so facing anyone remotely competent and aware is not going to end very well for him, especially if you're on an outdoor map. You do get Thrilling Tremors for this as a minor slowdown and information perk, but it can be played around relatively easily, while the other 2 perks aren't very useful to him in particular. Your add-ons aren't going to help a lot either, but you might get some use out of Driver's License for some extra slowdown. That and either Philly or Ghostface Caught on Tape might be your best bet if you want to do this adept. That and pray you roll an indoor map since he does a lot better on those. Following this are the killers you might struggle with, but not to the same degree as the previous 2. These are your point values of 4 through 6. Starting off here, Pig barely escapes being lower thanks to her having a fairly decent add-on pool, built-in slowdown, and one of her perks allowing her to try for insta-downs if she decides to proxy hooks. But other than that, her adept is one of the harder ones to get for a lot of the same reasons as the previous killers. Plus she needs to get downs to get her traps working, meaning she can have a whale of a time early on if she can't get said downs. Bubba's up next, and his placement is due to the fact that he has the ability to use Franklin's and get info with barbecue and chili. Additionally, his add-ons allow him to beef up his chainsaw and lower his tantrum duration, allowing you to increase his lethality that way. However, where the killer struggles is mainly Bubba himself, since while he can shred pallets well and can insta-down, there is a lot of pallets around at the moment, so he's going to be spending a lot of time doing the former. His mobility is very poor, and it's not too terribly hard to stun him while he's chainsawing. However, he is extremely lethal in endgame or in proxy camping, so you could maybe possibly cheese that to get the adept if you position yourself in a way where the anti-face camp's not triggering. Demogorgon is here due to being a decent killer themselves and having access to Surge and Mindbreaker, 2 really good perks to have a bit of slowdown and disable exhaustion perks, as well as windows of opportunity. There are 2 main problems with Demo though. The one relevant to gameplay being that your add-ons are not going to help you a lot for this adept, as Demo has one of the worst add-on selections in the game. The other issue is, why do this adept in the first place? Demogorgon got their adept removed from the game back when Stranger Things got delisted, and it wasn't added back when it returned, so unless you want the challenge, there's not really a reason to do this adept in the first place. Springtrap is up next, and the main thing stopping him from being higher is his perks. He has a good add-on selection, and Springtrap himself is solid once you get good with him, but other than Phantom Fear potentially being useful for info if you're not using the doors a lot, Help Wanted and Haywire are not going to be helping you out here very much, leaving you pretty much perkless. Loot Bag could be funny in this case to help secure some final kills if you got a couple kills before gens were done, but I wouldn't really recommend this add-on normally since it requires the gates to be open to get value from, and survivors can prep for it since they can see it in their HUD beforehand. Finally in this section, Unknown is a tragic case where they would have been higher up on this list if it wasn't for their add-on Gutting thanks to the Sinister Grace patch. Unforeseen and Unbound can act as a way to catch survivors off guard and get hits from vaults you normally wouldn't have gotten otherwise. But let me just say this, if you're getting value from Undone, you're most likely going to win that game anyway since it only really gets tokens against players who can't do skill checks and you can't run anything else to make said skill checks harder. Unknown themselves is really good if you're able to consistently land your hits, and you probably should since, as mentioned earlier, their add-ons took a hit last patch, so you'll have to hope you're good with them to get this done in a reasonable amount of time. However, this is easier said than done since this is also one of the most punishing killers in the game we're talking about here. Moving on to the next set of killers where the chance of getting their Adept in one game is around average, the 7 to 8 point crowd. Trapper ranks surprisingly high here, and if you thought this was an insane placement, don't worry, I fully agree. I was caught off by this as well. The main thing carrying Trapper this high is his add-ons, as his add-on selection is incredible and helps patch up a lot of his issues, such as Trap-a-Sack letting you start with all your traps, Eerie Stone resetting them automatically without your input, Honing Stone guaranteeing survivors caught in traps are insta-downed if no one helps them out, Makeshift Wrap letting him not have to worry about getting snagged in his own traps, so on and so forth. Outside of his add-ons, the rest of the numbers hold him back, as Trapper himself is considered one of the worst killers in the game. The worst if Skull Merchant didn't exist, and his perks, while Brutal Strength and Agitation are very good, they're not exactly the best on him in particular since they don't slot into his playstyle very well. I do truly feel like Trapper is the main outlier here. Under normal circumstances, I do feel Trapper is one of the hardest killers to Adept since you're playing a bottom tier without any slowdown, let alone Corrupt Intervention, a perk that's borderline required for Trapper to even get off the ground. Huntress is extremely similar to Springtrap in the sense that she herself is solid, her add-ons are good, but she has some of the worst perks in the entire game as teachables. However, I have her ranked a smidge higher than Springtrap since I do think her add-ons are a little bit better than his. Wraith would have been lower if it wasn't for Predator's rework and the fact that he works pretty decently with it. As it is, he's a decent killer with good add-ons, but Predator is the only perk he can work with since Bloodhound and Shadowborn are definitely perks to say the least. Deathslinger's up next, and he's mostly carried by the fact that he is a great chase power when bugs and invisible hitboxes aren't getting in the way, and the fact that he has access to some decent perks. He has Gearhead for info, Deadman Switch for slowdown, and Retribution for more info in case survivors don't expect the Adept achievement and cleanse it or other dull totems. The main thing stopping him from being higher is his add-ons being notoriously awful overall, being forced into Keys, the Cigar, and Eerie Coin most of the time. Although to be fair, Eerie Coin is incredibly impactful if you can land your shots. Sadako is in a similar vein to Deathslinger, only being carried by your perks and her add-ons. Another thing that I didn't include for her performance score is that Sadako tends to be a pub stomper due to a lot of people not knowing how to counter her for some reason, so that tends to be a pretty big help when doing her Adept. However, if people do know, then Sadako's threat level goes down dramatically, so keep that in mind when using her in general, not just for her Adept. Dredge is similar to her in this regard, but mostly because of Nightfall being an accessibility problem for people playing near windows during the day. Otherwise, its add-ons are very solid, but the main thing keeping Dredge down is due to its counterplay being simple if you're paying attention, as well as its perks being god-awful on this killer in particular. Darkness Revealed, unfortunately, does not work when teleporting around lockers. Septic Touch is Septic Touch, and Disillusion, while a very underrated perk, requires a terror radius to work, which Dredge loses when Nightfall's active. Overall, the lack of slowdown and having a map-dependent info perk hurts Dredge a lot when doing its Adept, but its add-ons do help it a fair bit. Doctor isn't doing very hot at the moment because of the pallet density being insane right now, but what does help him out a bit are his add-ons and perks. In particular, Monitor and Abuse works decently on him since the added terror radius range from chasing people gives Static Blast a little more range. while Overcharge allows Doctor to have a little bit of added slowdown. With the recent patch buffing up his numbers, Myers is doing a little bit better than he was when Sinister Grace first released. Granted, the lack of slowdown hurts a bit, but his perks work well when played into since all of them are related to the obsession. Dying Light may not be very useful here since while it does slow down 3 of the survivors, it comes with the downside of letting the obsession get shit done 33% faster, making this perk the reason the perk rating isn't higher. Legion's up next, and the one standout thing about this killer is that they are for sure getting boosted by their add-ons, especially Eerie Button. Discordance lets you know when survivors are grouping up on gens, while Mad Grit allows you to be immune to people body blocking when trying to hook. Iron Maiden won't really be much use here if the survivors aren't stupid, but hey, maybe you'll get lucky. After all, the only reason Legion isn't ranked as 0 in performance categories is because they pub stomp quite a bit. Following them is Nemesis, a killer who historically has a rough early game with no mobility, but makes up for it with becoming very threatening later on and an RNG factor with the zombies. Nemesis has access to Lethal Pursuer, which should help with the early game a bit, and Eruption for some extra slowdown after kicking gens. Although do keep in mind this perk can only activate 4 times per gen due to the anti-3 gen system and how that thing is applied. Your add-ons are the weakest part about this killer, but it shouldn't be too bad if you just stick with Liquor Tongue and Marvin's Blood like 90% of Nemesis players do. Xenomorph is a perfectly serviceable killer in most cases, but the killer rating is being dragged down a little bit if you get survivors who know how to best use the turrets, and the add-on selection has gotten better since the Tokyo Ghoul patch, giving them a touch-up alongside Xenomorph's base kit additions. The main thing keeping it back is its perks. Rapid Brutality means you're not getting Bloodlust to help you here, and Xeno doesn't really get use out of that perk very well since most of its hits are from the tail. Ultimate Weapon is useful for info, but it isn't really needed since Xeno has a base kit info tool courtesy of the tunnels, and Alien Instinct is pretty much the same deal, plus stealth being useless for Xeno since the turrets beeping give you away regardless of stuff like Oblivious or Undetectable. Finally, a Houndmaster is a very strong and underrated killer held back from play because of her bugs, but those aside, her add-ons are surprisingly decent enough. But like with Xeno, her perks are atrocious on her in particular. Jagged Compass is easily the best one here for knowing what gen needs your attention the most, synergizing with Snug's search command, while No Quarter and All Shaking Thunder aren't very useful due to being borderline useless or map dependent respectively. Moving on is our rank 9 to 11 killers. The category where you will have an above average chance of getting this Adept done quickly if you know what you're doing. Hag is here since she's rare and a pub stomper because of that. The main counterplay to her is harassing her web and being patient, but the overwhelming majority of matches are not going to be like this since, again, she's rare to face, so most survivors are unaware of everything you can do to counter her. Her perks and add-ons are all quite solid as well, but the one big downside with Hag besides her having a rough time if she runs into the rare chance of everyone knowing what to do against her, is that all 3 of her perks are totems. While Hag is a fantastic totem defender, if a totem spawns near survivors at the start or is outside your web, expect that thing to go. Pray that Devour doesn't get cleansed since that perk can let you snowball out of control if survivors don't remove it. Hillbilly is up next, and he is an incredibly powerful killer when used well, and his perks are all decent at best. Lightborn isn't really good, but it does guarantee you're safe from flashlights, flashbangs, and blast mine, while Enduring and Tinkerer can help out at pallets and let you know when a gen's close to popping respectively, even if Hillbilly is not going to be very stealthy unless he has that chainsaw muffling add-on. Speaking of, the add-on pool is mainly what's dragging Hillbilly down, as all its worthwhile ones tend to be purples or eerie grades, but if you do get a hold of them early on, they are very impactful. Freddy has the highest kill rate in the game last we were shown, and is pretty solid in his own right, as he has a lot of add-on variety to work with as well. The main issue here are his perks not being useful until the latter half of the game, as this is the killer with Remember Me and Blood Warden. Fire Up gets stronger the more gens are done, but at the very least you can still get value from it without it being endgame. Overall, have fun with your add-ons as these are the main things you'll be relying on here. Clown is sort of the opposite of Freddy in terms of rankings, as he has access to fantastic perks bar maybe Colorophobia, and his add-on selection can help make his bottles more lethal. However, the main issue here is Clown himself, since he has all his eggs in one basket with lethality, so if he can't make use of that said lethality well, whether it be skill issues, survivors pre-running, or there's a lot of pre-dropping of pallets, then Clown can start to have some trouble, especially if he gets unlucky and is dropping into one of the bigger maps. Oni is next, and let me be upfront, the only thing stopping Oni in regards to his Adept are his perks, as your only really usable one here is Zancian Tactics for aura reading and knowing where resources are. Otherwise, if you're able to get out of early game and get access to Blood Fury relatively early, Oni and his add-ons become absolute monsters, as Oni is well known for being one of the most explosive killers in this game, and his add-ons, while boring, are very impactful. Pyramid Head recently got an add-on pass that made his selection open up tremendously, and he has a lot of strong picks as well, such as increasing his ranged attacks width, letting him break pallets and walls with the attack, and more. All of this on a killer who can hit you from basically anywhere as long as you're in range of Punishment of the Damned and there's no gap in the floor makes him very dangerous to face. The only thing dragging him down is his perks, as while they're not as bad as they were some years ago, they're still somewhat underwhelming compared to other options he could be running but can't since, Adept. Trickster is a killer where maps do truly play a big role in how easily you're going to get this Adept, despite me saying that I'm not going to grade killers on it very much. He very much relies on line of sight to get stuff done quickly, as too much clutter and walls will get in his way a ton. Thankfully for all of Trickster's issues, he does have a decent add-on selection, and all three of his perks are very nice, especially No Way Out, allowing you to have some extra time in endgame depending on how many unique survivors you've hooked. Starstruck also gives you complete immunity to altruism while carrying survivors, since anyone attempting anything will cause the exposed status and will allow Trickster to insta-down people with M1. Something not impossible anymore since he has default movement speed. Wesker is fine enough in the add-on department, but is suffering a lot in the perk category since all three of his perks aren't very useful most of the time, as all three of these perks are perks that work better when combined with stronger perks from other killers. That said, Wesker's standalone strength is what carries him up this high, as despite being power crept by some of the more recent killers that have been getting added lately, his power remains solid and provides a bit of slowdown thanks to the Ouroboros infection. If you've got the frame perfect stuff down, you can just do a bunch of flashy stuff as well to catch people off guard. How helpful will this be? Probably not very, but at least you'll look cool doing it. Knight is a killer who's just average in all departments. He's got decent perks, decent add-ons, he's a decent killer. Not a whole lot else to say here really. Knight's just a pretty decent killer who, I would rather like to be running other stuff besides his teachables except maybe know where to hide. But for the Adept challenges, what he has to work with isn't terrible, especially if you're good at the macro game with him, which is where Knight's strength truly lies. Singularity might be a surprise to see this low, but I promise you, this is not because Singularity is weak. He is one of the most oppressive killers in the game when used well. His add-ons are all pretty good too, as you've got access to stuff like Kid's Baseball Glove, Denied Requisition Form, the Repair Diagnostic Tool, Nutritional Slurry, Soma Photo, Live Wires, among other things. What's really dragging Singularity down though is the lack of slowdown perks and the fact that his perks don't really synergize with him that well, aside from maybe machine learning allowing him to fucking zoom once the affected gen is done, especially in Overclock. Chucky is up next, and while he does tend to pub stomp thanks to how small he is, he's nowhere near as bad as he used to be back when he had Manual Scamper and unnerfed Rat Poison. Chucky has a decent add-on selection, but the main thing holding him back, once again, are his perks. Chucky being 4.4 means he likely won't get the insta-down from Friends Till the End very much. 2 can play is basically useless, and batteries included is useful later in the game or in endgame when all the gens are done. So overall, Chucky's fine himself, but it's mainly his perks not being great combined with him being a 4.4 speed killer that's dragging his placement down a bit. Vecna also has one of the highest kill rates in the game thanks to having a very loaded kit that is very taxing for newer players to understand, and he has several ways to make himself more lethal. Despite his multiple base kit changes, his add-ons remain solid as he still has access to his Eries to catch people off guard, especially Eerie Book allowing him to circumvent his counterplay significantly easier, Robe of Eyes for tracking, Bag of Holding to slow down magic item acquisition, and Pearl of Power to reward M1 hits with even faster spell recovery. Perks are once again the weakest part of him, but they're definitely not terrible compared to some other options. You're probably not going to get much use out of Weave Attunement since you don't have access to Franklin's here, but Languid Touch lets him bypass exhaustion perks, and Dark Arrogance lets him vault faster as long as you don't get blinded or get stunned, which this perk increases the penalties of. Dracula is basically a much stronger version of Vecna, so a lot of what I said for him applies here too. However, he is much worse in the perk department since his slowdown perk only affects the Obsession and is a Hex perk. Dominance can help defend it, but it's nowhere near as good as Undying from Blight, which we will get to soon. Human Greed lets him have aura reading, but this one depends on if survivors are doing chests or not, as well as being affected by anyone bringing the coin offerings into the match. Overall, definitely stronger overall than Vecna, but his worst perks let Vecna overtake him by a single point in this ranking. Finally, another surprising placement is Krisu, our most recent killer. Chicken Head and Lorenza's Remains is a very strong combination, and Krisu herself is a top 5 killer in the game, so I can guarantee you those are not the issues here. The main issue here that's dragging Krisu down is, again, her perk selection, as she's not very likely to get use out of Ravenous due to it being an M1 perk that the head form cannot use, while Wandering Eye and Overture of Doom can be tricky to use, the latter perk also being somewhat easy to find the totem of since it affects the farthest generator from it. Our last selection here is our rank 12 to 15 killers, the one I believe you'll have the best chances of completing their adepts quickly if you choose to go for them. Nurse needs no introduction at this point, with her being a top 2 killer and just playing a completely different game than the majority of the roster. The only real thing that can slow Nurse down is her lack of usable perks, and aside from maybe Nurse's Calling, but she's one of those killers where she doesn't really need slowdown perks consistently to do well if you know what you're doing. If you roll a small map, especially something like Midwich, this adept should be a walk in the park. Spirit is a killer with the most sound reliance in the game, both as and against her. With good headphones and awareness, she's a very easy killer to play with a lot of reward once you get used to her gameplay loop, assisted further by her add-ons being very solid. Especially if you run something like the Mother-Daughter Ring, Cherry Blossom, cooldown add-ons, etc. to make the power even stronger or more frequently available. I know we've had a streak of killers like this, but once again, her problems are perks. Haunted Grounds can potentially change the game state if cleansed at a poor time for survivors, but it's inconsistent. Rancor is decent for info and can let you secure a Mori at the end of the game on the Obsession, but without an Obsession changing perk, it's not very useful most of the time. And Spirit Fury on its own without Enduring isn't very worthwhile. This trend of killers being dragged down by their teachables ends for a second here, as Plague is one of the highest ranking killers here, having the ability to completely shut down healing while having very stacked add-ons, and her perks work amazingly on her. Quite literally, the only thing stopping Plague from having a perfect score is the fact that she's countered by not cleansing, or if you do so, doing it far from Gen so she has to go out of her way to get her power, and the fact that Dark Devotion isn't really a good perk. But other than that, Plague's Adept is honestly just feels like a regular Plague game, especially since she gets to use Corrupt Intervention here. One of her best perks, and just one of the best perks in the game in general. Blight is another killer like Nurse where it isn't a major shocker to see him ranked this high, and spoiler alert, he's the highest ranked killer overall in this ranking. His power needs no explanation at this point, but he also comes with a strong set of add-ons that still make a big difference in the match despite their several nerfs and various reworks, and he has access to one of the better hex perks in the game alongside Undying. Hell, thanks to his mobility, you might even get use out of Dragon Script, but this perk is the one thing stopping him from a perfect score similar to Plague. Twins is another killer similar to Hag, where you will likely get her adept super quickly since not many will play optimally against her or prepare to face her just in general. But unlike Hag, Twins' power benefits from having the best slugging potential in the game and is one of the most lethal overall thanks to Victor being an obnoxious little shit if the Twins player is good. The speed add-ons that affect Victor are some of the most potent available, but there's other options that help as well, such as Toy Sword and especially Silencing Cloth. The perks are the weakest part of Twins, but that's less because they're bad, unless we're talking about Hoarder, and more because you'll be using Victor for 90% of the match, so they won't get to use Coup de Grace or Oppression very much. Now, if you're facing survivors who overload on anti-slug and healing stuff, then this killer will struggle a lot since playing them like a normal killer is a one-way ticket to getting 4-man outed, but let's be real, that's not going to be the case the majority of the time. You'll be fine. Pinhead is another killer where he's just solid across the board, with the killer himself being the weakest part since he relies on being able to control his chain hunts for most of the game and is just very macro focused in general, very quickly struggling if he gets the box too little or especially against survivors with communication who know how he works. That said, just like with Demogorgon, there's also very little reason to do this adept in the first place since not only are his perks universal now, the Hellraiser chapter was pulled from the store, meaning this adept is no longer available and you have to pay $500 to your nearest scalper for Pinhead himself, which, please don't. Do this adept if you want, but it isn't really needed nowadays for 100% achievement completion. Artist is unsurprising to see high since she's rare to see, just like Hag and Twins, but unlike them, her add-on strength and variety is much worse than them. However, where she lacks in add-ons, she absolutely makes up for in her teachable perks, as she comes with 2 of the best slowdowns in the game in Pain Res and Grim Embrace. Pentimento can also be useful and impactful, but the only way this is getting screen time is if survivors cleanse dull totems for some reason. Otherwise, it's just gonna sit there and be useless. As our final killer, John Ghoul is infamously a very strong killer who's great at pub stomping, but is also able to hold his own against good survivors as well thanks to his incredible map mobility, the ability to ignore several strong aspects of survivor gameplay, very strong add-on strength, and being able to get injures very easily. The one thing affecting Kaneki is, take a guess? The perks not being that great. Although Forever Entwined is a solid perk, both for getting the hooking phase over with quicker and for messing up save timing. Overall, I don't expect getting Kaneki's Adept to take very long, especially if you got a good grasp at using him. And that concludes the list. Obviously, this is not entirely one-for-one accurate on how easy each Adept is to get, since a big factor that comes into this challenge is luck, since you'll only have the base teachables of each killer to work with, and you'll essentially be at the mercy of the map and who you're facing. Hence, when you do these achievements, especially on new releases, I highly recommend knocking them out early. Do it while everyone's dumb to the new stuff. That way you can make it as painless as you can, and so you don't have to worry about it later. If you enjoyed the video and you want to see more, feel free to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and join the community Discord server in the description. Let me know what your experiences have been with the Adept achievements and how many tries has it taken for you to get them on your favorite killers. And with that in mind, cheers!